So, programmatic. How many folks have familiarity with programmatic media and marketing? Where are we starting? So let me put it this way. Who's familiar with programmatic already? Yeah? Good. All right, so that's maybe 3/4. And how many where programmatic is brand spanking new? This is a completely new area. Okay, thank you. First of all, welcome to Digital First Friday. This is, I think, our third, maybe? John, third?
Yeah, number 3.
Number 3. Okay. Well, it turns out it can be done. When we first started thinking about this, John Morgan and I, John, co-founder of Digital First Friday back there, he and I said, could we pull this off on a monthly basis? Would there be enough subject matter, enough interest? Could this thing really work for all of us monthly? So far, so good, I think. Although we could use a little more seating. We'll have to work on that. So sorry you all in the back. I guess you would bring chairs up from downstairs maybe. That might be possible. And there are a couple of unused chairs up front. So we're going to talk about what programmatic is, where it's come from, where it's headed. And to be clear, much of this is coming from the experience and opinions of a person. So along the way, you maybe find things that are disagreeable, where you're just not sure that your point of view would be the same as my own, which is perfectly fine. We're so early on in the life of programmatic, there's lots of room for interpretation, and we'll talk about that. Before we get started, I did want to share a couple of quick things. One is, you should please count on the fact that we're going to keep this going. Every first Friday of the month, you can count on our having.
Bill, are you amplified?
I'm not amplified.
Okay.
This is for the video camera. Okay. I'll just have to project. So, John, if I'm not, give me this.
We're okay.
Okay.
I thought you said you were going to get a.
We are, but it's not for that purpose.
Okay.
There is a speaker here, and it's for a short video that I did a few years ago, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it in the back. So this Digital First Friday continues to keep going. One of the reasons that John and I wanted to put this together is really for you all to have an opportunity to meet each other, to learn from each other, to network. So not just for speakers, but simply to be able to help us to build and sustain a community, good times and bad, for digital. And we really work at the intersection, most of us, between media and marketing, data and technology. Most of us are St. Pete. Some are coming from Clearwater, from Sarasota, one person from Lakewood Ranch, and we've got some people from Tampa, and occasional visitors from elsewhere. We had somebody from Los Angeles 2 First Fridays ago. Some people are in search, looking for their next gig, and some people are looking to hire for their department, their business, a project that they're looking to staff. How many people are looking to add people to their teams? Who is in search to try to add someone to their team? I am at iSOCRATES. John is back there. Some other people are up here. So if we can keep our hands raised for a second. Okay. These are the people who are looking to add talent to their teams. Who here is talent looking for the right fit? Who's looking for something? Got to raise your hands high. Okay, so for the, all right. So there are those of us who are looking, those, maybe we can make a match. You never know, and it might not be right now. It might not be your particular company. Maybe it's someone that you know. But one of the things that I really enjoy about this community is that people are there helping each other. I've come down here from New York where that community is not all about helping each other. So if there are ways that we can be of help to one another, I think that's awesome. We're going to get started on this presentation. Programmatic media and marketing, not one or the other, but both. And we're going to start with some of the foundations of programmatic and kind of where it's come from. Programmatic as an industry or category that now employs over 100,000 people worldwide, it didn't even exist prior to about 12 years ago. And we're going to talk about how is that possible and what programmatic is. So the starting point is well over 100 years ago. who's familiar with the John Wanamaker quote? John Morgan is. All right, so how about anybody under the age of, say, 75? Okay, all right, so maybe half of us. John Wanamaker was in Philadelphia. He was a dry goods merchant, or what we would call a department store.
1914.
1914. So that's over 100 years ago. And he said that he was one of the largest spenders on newspaper advertising in particular. And people said, my God, you're spending all this money. And he said, well, I don't mind spending the money. The problem is I'm wasting half of it. I don't know which half, so I'm spending. And years later, we saw a version of the same quote from Philip Wrigley, running the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company, where he was spending half of his revenue on advertising. And again, he said, I'd love to spend less. I just don't know what's not working, so I got to keep throwing stuff against the wall, hoping that something sticks. But we're not in that world anymore, and programmatic is one of those reasons. I think the thing to keep in mind here is that one way of looking at programmatic is that it helps with efficiency. That is, it reduces waste. But that's not all that it does. And we're going to take a look at what I mean by that. Some of the challenges that media companies and marketers have had now going on over a century are some of these other elements. So we talked about the waste where someone's blanket spending and they're not able to figure out what's working. But there are other things going on as well. Who's actually being exposed to the messages that are being put out? If any of you have ever been involved with radio or with broadcast or out of home, it can be very frustrating. Who's actually getting the message? Is it who I intend? And very often the solution, the answer you're getting back is a sample from a very small panel driven by surveys or by a small sampling, for example with Nielsen, where it's literally an incredibly small percentage of the total population. So this problem about measurement is a big one. You want to know where did someone get the message? How many times did they see it? And maybe they saw it too many times. Which channels of media did things show up in? What was the actual cost involved? And why does it have to be so expensive? That is, how much of media and marketing spend is not going against the target, working media, but being spent on all these other things that are other than what the marketer is intending, or the media company that's burning up cash in support of everything short of actually building and sustaining the audiences that are getting paid for. The truth for most advertising is that from a seller's standpoint, most advertising is not sold in advance. That is, sold out in advance. Much advertising is going unsold or sold at the last minute, kind of just in time. And programmatic and digital has made that even more extreme. Today, the vast majority of ad inventory, digital ad inventory, is being sold literally within the last second, the last 1,000 milliseconds or less, before it expires worthless. We are moving into a market where there's significant remnant inventory. There always was remnant inventory, but inventory is, short of programmatic, very, very hard to identify what's available for sale if you're a buyer, and to be able to buy that in an efficient way. And if you're a seller and you've got this remnant inventory, how do you let people know about it? How do you price it? How do you break it down and make it relevant? How do you price this for buyer and seller? What are good ways of doing that? Historically, we used rate cards, just standardized rate, discount to rate card. Given a dynamic market, buyers and sellers should be able to set their own prices based on the relative supply or demand at that moment for that particular inventory. Increasingly, we're talking about individual impressions. You as a person, a device, or a household. And then how do we put this all together in the right mix? Media and marketing is about a trade-off that exists between efficiency and effectiveness. How are we going to put this all together? What you're going to learn is that programmatic helps us to do that. Again, before programmatic, we didn't know who the audience was exactly. So instead, what we said as advertisers is, you know, we'll figure out what the context is. And if somebody is watching this particular program, they're reading this magazine, they're interested in this particular content, will guess that this is the right person. So the classic would be, I know that there's a lot of waste, but maybe if I'm trying to get to a business-to-business decision maker, I'll just run it on golf. Anything associated with golf, they'll be in there somewhere. So context essentially has been a proxy for the audience that you're trying to get to. But today we have a different option. But remember, in the previous over 100 years, basically you had to make a guess. What context, what program, what station, what magazine is going to get me the audience, knowing that there's a certain percentage where I'm just not getting what I'm trying to get. Very much like dropping bombs, 500-pound bombs on a target. I don't know who was around watching the Gulf War back in, I want to say, 91, 92. Some people, my business partner was one of those guys up in the air dropping those bombs. But essentially, at that moment in time, for those of us that were watching television, particularly CNN, we saw laser-guided bombs for the first time, where they were picking targets and dropping against a very specific location. Not general, not zip code, not the block, but that particular location. We hadn't seen that before. Advertising, in many respects, is becoming as precise or more precise. It's the individual person that we're after, the device or the household. In the last roughly 20 years, we've had amazing opportunity in digital that has created the technical foundation for us to be able to even have the conversation about programmatic. And the starting point is the immense computer power that is now available. It's so inexpensive. Bandwidth is cheap and widely available. We've got storage. Computation is quick and easy, and we have lots of choices about it. Those are things that allow us to be able to do things that we could never do before with the data associated with media and marketing. And if they had those advances not taken place with cloud computing as an example, we'd never have the opportunity to be able to the kind of leaps that we have in media and marketing. Another big issue for us is that advertising inventory is now exchange traded. It's auction based, which means that buyers and sellers can set prices and they can change prices, and they can do so algorithmically. It doesn't have to be done by a human being, it could be done by a computer. But it allows us to be able to be much more flexible about how we buy and sell and what we buy and sell. And exchange-based means auctions, very much like what we've seen in financial services, in commodity trading, as an example. A couple of other things. We have globalization, the opportunity to be able to do this worldwide. We can be as hyper-local as we want or as broad as we want. And we've got an opportunity to be able to do things very, very quickly, changing them in real time or near real time to get exactly what we're trying to achieve as marketers, and for a publisher to be able to get potentially premium pricing that we might not have been able to get otherwise. Last thing is personalization, which is a two-sided coin. How many people have been targeted in the last week with some kind of a personalized offer where they got it almost right? That is,
almost right.
Almost right is maybe everything was right except your name was not correct on the offer. Or they got the name, but they're offering you something that's completely irrelevant.
Right.
There you go. Right. How about the retargeting, where you're continuously getting advertising for something that you are no longer a potential target for because you already bought it. Or you bought the opposite of that thing that you were being targeted for. So these things are not yet totally perfect, are they? We have a long way to go. But there's tremendous opportunity available because of the advance of science. We are no longer in this era. Who's this?
Don Draper.
Who said that? Raise your hand if you said Don Draper. All right, if you know Don Draper, you get a reward. So here are a few pens. People would appreciate Don Draper, might appreciate a pen, so pass those down. So those of you who might not appreciate Don Draper, you don't need a pen because you're only using your mobile phones or computers.
Could you imagine if we got a cell phone?
Right. So here we have the world that we live in today. These processes and platforms that you see here, this is what's happening in less than 1,000 milliseconds. 1,000 milliseconds is a second. Most of these operations are taking place in sub 50 milliseconds. This is not Don Draper's Three Martini world, selling the big idea. It's something that requires very different kind of skills, different way of thinking, different investments. And it's a whole new world. It's a programmatic world. This kind of complexity, this is just an abstraction. What I've drawn up here for you, this is literally, it's true, but it's an abstraction of an even more complex set of activities that are going on, most of which are driven by data and algorithms, and which have become a $49 billion industry as of the end of last year, according to industry analysts. Within that $49 billion programmatic media and marketing industry, which did not exist prior to about 2007, there is a solutions market made up of service providers, many of whom in this room, many of you, almost all of you, are either service providers, you are users of services in this space, or could be, or providers. I'm calling those solutions. That market is about 5% of the total spend activity that's going on. And that overall market is going to at least double in the next 5 years. Even in the event of a tough economy, because of the cost savings that are available to marketers and the ability for and requirement of publishers to monetize their unsold inventory, and the likelihood that we are moving into television, audio, digital out of home, vast new areas of ad inventory being brought into this market where the average cost per thousand is much, much higher than the typical CPMs that have been paid for banner advertising, for example, or search. We're looking at a market that's going to be growing dramatically. At a minimum, it will double over the next 5 years. And the solutions market, which many of us will be tapping either as a customer or provider, at least double in size. So what exactly is programmatic? So here I put a couple of definitions for you. Programmatic media is automated serving of digital ads in real time based on individual ad impressions. It's disparate data. Again, algorithmic, you heard that from me. These are trading systems. Think about that, trading. We're in media and marketing, but this is trading. We have a convergence in this industry of trading activity, auction-based trading, merging with areas that have been far less analytical previously. This is sort of right brain and left brain coming together in ways that many of us were not originally taught or skilled. These are things that we're going to have to learn, and most of us are out of school now, and we're going to have to figure out how to do this on the fly, on the job. It's hard to go back to school to learn this because there are very few books, or this really isn't written in very many formal ways. But the reality for programmatic is that you've got some core requirements. One of those requirements is that most of this is happening in real time. Most of this is dynamic price generation, dynamic supply and demand. Sometimes in programmatic, we'll hear a phrase called mad tech. Anybody know mad tech? You're hearing mad tech as a phrase? It's interesting. Okay, so we talk about it in our shop as if everyone does. It's helpful for me to know that maybe that phrase is less common. Mad tech is the combination of marketing technology and advertising technology converged. We believe that programmatic is becoming mad tech. It's this idea of the two coming together, and that you cannot have one without the other. In most instances, if you're trying to maximize the wealth of whoever your primary stakeholder is, and in most cases, that's usually either the marketer or the publisher. So what is it that these things have in common? By the way, we don't call this a business anymore, we call this a bidness. It's bidness because this is all becoming auction-based. So what are some of those common things? The first thing is the granularity of the data. We're no longer talking about generalities. We're typically talking about whether it's personally identifiable or anonymous. It's a person, a household, or a device. It's one-to-one marketing, matching that particular appropriate message to that particular audience, that identity. Real-time trading, we've been talking about that. How do we figure out what the right price to offer, what's the right price to pay? And the nice thing is the pricing is typically on a per 1,000 impression basis. So this is an area where you don't have to make big forward commitments. You can test and try and do different things, and you can fail quickly and easily at relatively low cost. That's one of the great positives of programmatic. You have the ability potentially to be able to create on the fly the message that you want to deliver. This is done very rarely in our industry, but there's great opportunity. For those companies that are doing this, they're getting huge return on investment. I just looked at something for a client a couple of days ago. We were comparing two different competitors in a space. One competitor was using 1,300 different creatives in the last 12 months, where they're literally trying to match exactly the right message. Their competitor is using less than 100 different creatives. One is the one who's doing much more creative is outspending his competitor about 10 to 1 in programmatic. The other guy is buying fixed advertising, not programmatic, using far fewer creatives. I don't know exactly what the difference in the economic outcome is, but I can tell you that the bigger business is much bigger than the smaller business. They're really doing a great job of linking a data-driven approach to how they're executing media and marketing. Automation. I started out the conversation by saying I can't believe we're all together on a Friday night talking about automation. This is no different than if this was maybe 30 or 40 years ago at the onset of enterprise resource planning, where big companies, big software companies and big consulting companies were working on trying to automate organizations in human resources or manufacturing and distribution. It's coming to this market. In the short term, it means lots of jobs, good paying jobs, lots of new skills and capabilities, but like that industry, there'll be rationalization along the way, and we're going to talk about that. Last thing is optimization. One of the great promises of programmatic is optimization. So, through the magic of the internet, I'm going to play a short video for you that lays out what a typical cycle is like in the bidding for and selling of programmatic ad inventory. This is a video that I created a few years ago, and over 100,000 people have downloaded this on YouTube. It'll take more than a couple of seconds, but not too long, and hopefully it'll help you to understand programmatic.
Welcome to 200 milliseconds, the life of a programmatic ad impression. Jane Doe clicks on a URL, and the publisher's content begins to load in browser. Publisher may find information it has stored on Jane Doe, possibly in its data management platform, or DMP. Publisher sends available information to its ad server, asking ad server whether an ad campaign is available that would target Jane Doe. If there is a campaign matching Jane Doe's profile, an ad is served. If no campaign targets Jane Doe, the server seeks to match the impression, programmatically requesting response from selected traders, ad networks, and supply-side platforms, or SSPs. If the impression is not cleared, the server may seek to clear the impression in a programmatic direct way via private exchanges. If the impression is again not cleared, the request is sent to an open ad exchange in hopes of achieving liquidity. Open Ad Exchange sends a bid request containing information on Jane Doe's browser, website URL, and ad type to multiple bidders, including traders, ad networks, and demand-side platforms, or DSPs. Each bidder processes bid request, overlays it with additional user data and marketers' targeting and budget rules. Each bidder's algorithm evaluates the request, selects the creative, and sends it along with optimal bid price to Ad Exchange. Ad Exchange selects winning bid from bidders' responses through second price auction. Ad Exchange sends winning ad URL and price for winning bid to publisher's ad server. publisher's ad server tells Jane Doe's browser which ad to display. Jane Doe's browser pulls ad from winning bidder's ad server and sends matching ad to browser. Browser displays web page, including matching ad. Winning bidder's ad server receives ad tag data on Jane Doe's initial interaction experience. And that is 200 milliseconds, the life of a programmatic ad impression.
There you go. So this is one very large ecosystem. And in fact, here's something that you may not see anyplace else. I put together a timeline that'll give you a sense of the history of programmatic, where technically it started back in 94 and 95, before we had programmatic as we know it today, but at the start of digital, up through the present time. These are sort of milestones in the development of programmatic. I'm going to post this on our website, on the DFF site and on the iSOCRATES site, so you'll be able to see this in your own time. And this has been a bear to keep up. I've started this timeline shortly after I started on the internet, and I keep having to update it every few years. It's been fun to see how things change. Anybody familiar with these?
Yeah.
Yes? You've seen the Lumascape? Lumascape is on the right. That's ad tech. How about the one on the left? Anybody ever seen that one?
Yeah.
That's marketing technology. Okay, between the two, those are over 10,000 vendors. Those aren't ad agencies. Those are primarily data and tech companies. Over 10,000 of them in total, and growing and declining at the same time. It's an amazing market where essentially you have companies that are busy going out of business, merging, starting. This is what sits between the buyer and the seller in the media business. And they are sucking up the majority of the economics, and we're going to take a look at that. But this mad tech or programmatic industry, it's big and really complicated. I wish it were otherwise, but that's what all they're doing. That's the simplification of the complexity of all those companies. So let me boil it down. In programmatic breaks out in the following ways. The way in which you place orders, insertion orders, you could have automation, what we call automated IOs, demand-side platforms. People know demand-side platforms? This is technology that's being used to be able to help you to be able to organize your campaign, plan it, and execute it. And usually the planning is very modest in these things, but typically the DSP is going to help you to be able to get your order in. Agency trading desks. Anybody work on an agency trading desk today? Anybody work on a non-agency trading desk? I work on a non-agency trading desk. You work on a non-agency trading desk. In-house trading desks. What's an in-house trading desk? That's where a marketer or publisher says, screw the agency, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to license the technology, and I'm going to do this on my own. Growing trend. Flavors of programmatic. These are different specific ways in which programmatic gets executed. Now, I definitely do not have enough time to be able to do all this tonight. And in New York, I teach a course specifically on this, and it takes us roughly 32 hours to get all the way through programmatic, kind of beginning, middle, and end, with each of these different techniques, and not simple stuff. What's interesting about this is the flavors of programmatic you can count on about every 2 years. There is a new box I have to add to this slide, where there is a whole new way of being able to buy in an automated fashion in this electronic buying and selling. That's a very specific protocol. These tend to be oriented towards publishers who are trying to figure out a way to get some additional premium pricing out of their inventory. It tends not to be driven by the demand side. It tends to be somebody who's trying to sell something. A vendor who says, I want to squeeze some new value out of whatever it is that I'm doing or could be doing. Every once in a while, innovation will come from the demand side, but oftentimes it's coming from venture capital-backed technology companies or the supply side of the market. And what's the supply side look like? If you look to the right, the hottest things going right now are those assets associated with sight, sound, and motion. Why? Because that's what, as human beings, is most appealing to us. It's the thing that causes messages to stick the most in our consciousness. not banner ads, video or some derivative of video. It's the most impactful thing that you can do, and we are seeing this spreading. So we see it in television, we're seeing more advanced forms of audio, and the latest advances that I'm seeing are in digital out of home. As an example, where you're going to see sight, sound, and motion coming out of things like the freezer door in a grocery store or a convenience store, where there's going to be messaging being put in front of you associated with traffic in a store. And their goal is going to be to try to personalize those messages based on who you are. So more complex diagrams. This is what it looks like for one company. That's what ours looks like. This is what we operate every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, between our operations in India and what we do in the US. That's one company who's trying to do email, search, display, video, digital out of home, all kinds of things. That's what it takes to be able to do this at scale for larger companies or smaller, doesn't really matter. This is why this stuff is typically not done in-house. You have to have very substantial resources to pull this off. And our clients are among the largest public companies in the world, and they can't do it all themselves. There's a lot going on. By the way, the part that's the purple that you see in the middle, that's unified business intelligence. That's the idea that we're going to try to bring together what's going on at the enterprise level and individual campaigns at the individual customer or audience level, between the different buy-side and sell-side activities, ad tech and martech. We're trying to bring it all together. Not simple when you think back about the vendors. We have to do this so that there's flexibility to be able to have our customers pick and choose which platforms they're most comfortable with. And all of this is platform driven. Increasingly, you make a decision on what you're going to do based on whether you're going to be with Adobe or Salesforce or Google or Facebook. It's typically driven by platforms, and then there are products and features off those platforms. I mentioned the unified business intelligence. That's what this looks like, just that little piece of our architecture. Those are the kinds of components that are in there. So we talked about waste and efficiency. Programmatic, in theory, is supposed to be a lot more efficient for buyers and sellers. But let me share with you, in the same way that it's supposed to be really automated, and if it's so automated, then how could you have 100,000 people working in the industry? Let me tell you, we are not anywhere near the level of efficiency that's possible and likely in this industry. And here's a breakdown that I put together for you of how a marketer's $1 of spending gets distributed across different parts of the industry. And this will give you some idea of the lack of efficiency of what's going on. And let me compare this to making an investment on the New York Stock Exchange when you want to go buy 100 shares of stock. Now, if you were to spend $10,000 to buy 100 shares of stock, how much would you expect to spend with the stock exchange or your broker for transacting? We'd be looking at pennies per share, right? Should be pennies. Should be a fraction of 1% to bring a buyer and a seller together. The stock exchange isn't taking any risk. They're simply matching up as a marketplace, a buyer and a seller. That's what we're talking about here. Programmatically, we're bringing a buyer and a seller. The marketer's going to spend $1, and let's take a look on the far right side, second to last of these bars, the publisher. So the publisher is supposed to be getting 40% in this case. Imagine that if you were a buyer and seller with stock, can you imagine the other guy getting 40%? So that you were supposed to buy it at $10 and he got $4 because the stock exchange took 60%?
Nope.
Okay, we would have investigations, Congress would have a field day, right? There would be, the FBI would be on it. You'd say there's no way. Antitrust, fraud, But in this industry, this is very common. And here's exactly how the money gets split. 5% is typical for what the creative agency might receive as a that total buy for putting together the campaign. The ATD, in this case the agency trading desk, they maybe are going to charge 15% for transacting. They might do it for less for bigger clients, but 15% is not untypical. The demand side platform, that's the technology platform that was being used by the buyer to be able to make the transaction happen. They might be charging 10%. For bigger clients, big agencies, it's less. For smaller agencies, it could be more. 25%, that's a big slice. That's going for something that we never ever had before programmatic, and that is it's going to go for data for targeting. It's the who. Programmatic is all about the who. And why is programmatic about the who? It's because as marketers, the closer you get to knowing your customer, the likelihood is you're going to be more effective and you're ultimately going to be more efficient about your spending. Because in the end, it's going to be a person that's going to make a purchase. So there's a tendency to focus on who more than context or any other decision parameter. The other thing that you're going to use is other forms of technology in order to, for example, to verify, did you get what you contracted for? Lots of different technologies. But today, this money is coming out of the publisher. Publisher used to get the vast majority of this money. Now the publisher is giving up value so that other people, other stakeholders in the industry are getting paid, and a lot of money. That data tech piece, we're talking about, we said the market was $49 billion. They're getting 25% of $49 billion. And that market didn't exist before programmatic. The exchange, there's going to be a marketplace for buying and selling. The DSP is going through another party to be able to find the inventory to make the purchase. That entity needs to get paid. That's 10%. The publisher, maybe, if they're lucky, might get 40%, except the publisher's got a problem. And that is that, according to the industry statistics, about half of the total available inventory is either going to be fraudulent traffic or non-viewable by a human being. And increasingly, publishers not going to get paid for that. There are now ways for us to be able to determine what is and what isn't fraudulent. And the issue for a marketer is, are you going to pay extra money to figure that out? So what are we left with? 18 cents maybe net is going to wind up with the publisher. 65 cents went to all those non-risk-bearing middlemen. And this is supposed to be the efficient way to buy. Lots of room for improvement here. But despite this, this industry's gone from nothing to 49 billion. And the reason is, even though it's as inefficient as it is, there's so much money that got squeezed out of the publishers that went over to all of these middlemen and to savings for the marketer that it justifies the existence of the industry. But my guess is to get to $100 billion, these guys in the middle, they're going to get squeezed. They're not going to get the kind of rent that they get today. There's going to be more and more pressure on the pricing and margins for those fellows. So that'll give you some idea of this more efficient way to buy content. So, to your point, what kinds of issues are there that are out there? Well, the first thing is, at iSOCRATES, we think that there's an incredibly large global opportunity in what we call programmatic resource planning and execution. And we imagine that this is as big in our industry as what enterprise resource planning has been in corporate software. And we think that that's what's going on and will continue to go on. It's excellent investment opportunity, excellent opportunity for having a career. Huge problem that at this point is unresolved, and that is the privacy rights that you all have as consumers. For the longest time in America, consumers basically gave up all privacy. We got paid nothing. There were no rules. Europeans came along in the last couple of years and said, we think consumers should have all the rights. and have dramatically changed what that looks like. And as far as digital media and marketing investment in Europe is concerned, it has become like the medieval ages. It is horrible for them. Basically, you have tens of billions of dollars of money that was going to be directed to Europe that's not being spent there because of fear over lawsuits associated with privacy. So the issues for us in the North American market is, where are we going to sort out? In this trade-off of the right of the consumer and the right of commerce, where do we wind up? A lot of this is political. Where do we go as a country? Are we an Obama country? Are we a Trump country? Where are we vacillating? What happens in the individual states? There's currently laws being promulgated in California that look a lot more like Europe than they do the rest of the US. We are less than 300 business days, no, 300 total days away from the implementation of those California laws. In those laws, a consumer opts in, doesn't opt out. Consumer basically has to make a explicit decision that they want to be tracked and they want to share information. That's a completely different thing than where we've been. Cookies, another area that's a big challenge. Cookies, essentially, as a way of identifying you, are going away quickly for a whole variety of reasons. There's going to be a replacement identity where there's a whole battle to be done over how are we going to identify you. Ad blocking, how many people have their ad blocker on right now? How many people don't know whether they have their ad blocker on? So I'm going to guess probably a third of you that don't think you have it on actually have it on. Again, goes right to the publisher problem. Publishers aren't getting revenue from advertising if they're not able to serve up those ads. These are all unresolved challenges and opportunities that I've identified that are facing the programmatic market. And these are big ones. Some of these are completely existential for the future of the industry. And they're not all going to get resolved in the next year or two or three. By the way, in terms of publishers, one of the things that publishers desperately need is to be able to sell their inventory in advance, not just in real time, but to be able to know that next year, next quarter, 2 months from now, that they've been able to sell some of this inventory in advance. In the same way that marketers might have a product launch coming up and they want to make sure that space is reserved so they know for sure they're going to get their message to the right audience. Today there is no futures market. We were talking about auctions and the financial markets. In those markets you can hedge. There is an ability to buy in the future. We don't have that today. So I think that's a whole area that will become significant in our industry. So anyway, lots of unresolved issues, and the result of which is that we wind up with winners and losers. And this is one man's guess as to who some of these winners and losers might be. Some of them are pretty obvious, like the walled garden providers. Some might be a little less obvious. In my case, I think that the consultancies have a tremendous leg up over traditional agencies, and that they're just going to keep taking share away. On the loser side, there's no shortage of them. We've already seen ad networks get decimated. That's really not new. But supply-side platforms, they're in deep trouble as well. Publishers left and right are failing to adapt. There's a publisher that I know really well, we work with regularly, where it's kind of weird. It's like a deer in a headlight, where you're telling them, here's what's happening to your business. Here's what this month looks like compared to last month. It's completely linear. You can see precisely where things are going. And we just gave them a list of, here are 8 things you need to do to change the direction of what's going on in the monetization of your business. Not one of them are they doing. And it's like, okay, well, you're going to hit a wall, and that wall is less than 12 months out. You can see exactly what caused it. It's really critical that you not just observe what's going on, but that you make a positive decision to make a change, to adopt new ways of doing business, and not everybody can do that. Anyway, programmatic is interesting, great opportunities, complicated. For those of us that are in it, this is not going to disappear in the next few years. We have a nice long cycle here. There's just going to be a lot of tumult along the way. And thank you all very much.